Last week, we kicked off this series entitled Canceled. And we talked a little bit about cancel culture and how sometimes social media can turn into this petty, ugly, angry place where people will comment stuff they would never say in person. But what we did was we looked at a story in the Bible where Jesus encounters this woman who was very different than him. She was a Samaritan and Jesus was a Jew, and so they would never interact. But Jesus does something amazing. He starts a conversation and he shows her respect and values her. And as a result, she does the same thing. And then she tells people about that interaction. So last week we talked about how we are to love people who might look a little bit different than us, or maybe even a lot different than us. But sometimes social media, it can be a pretty awesome place. It can be an entertaining place sometimes, especially like when your grandparents get online, right? Or maybe even your parents, right? So here's what I want to tell you. There was a time where hashtag became popular. Some of you don't hashtag, some of you hashtag way too much. Some of you hate hashtag. I just said hashtag like a million times. Anyway, I remember when hashtag started to come out. And I remember picking up my phone, and my dad had texted me, and it was the day that Andy Griffith died. And he said, "Hey, Caleb, I wanted to let you know that Andy Griffith passed away. Hashtag sad day in Mayberry. Hashtag Mayberry will never be the same." And I was like, "Dad, you don't use hashtags in text messages." Like, that was my initial thought. I didn't respond to that because my dad was a big Andy Griffith fan, and so I was like, "Oh, that's very sad." But then I took a screenshot and I sent it to my sister, and it was a fun laugh. So here's what we're gonna do. Pause this video, share a funny story of maybe your parent or your grandparent commenting on something inappropriately, but they didn't realize it was inappropriate, or just making a fool of themselves on social media. Pause this video, and I hope you have a few good laughs. So I'm going to take a wild guess and say there's sometimes in your family where your aunt, your uncle, your grandma, maybe your mom, your dad, your brother, sister, maybe not so much them, but they get a little confused about how technology works, right? You show up to Christmas or even Thanksgiving coming up in a couple weeks, and the first thing your grandma says to you is, "Hey, there's something wrong with my phone." Like, it's not, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here." It's, "Hey, fix this." Or, you show up to a family gathering, your crazy uncle or your crazy aunt, same thing. "Hey, for some reason my phone when I turn it sideways, it won't turn sideways." And you just hit the lock button, and you're like, that's all you do. And they're like, "Oh, okay," right? We all had those circumstances where someone asked us to do something. And at first, right, it's easy. And you're like, "Hey, yeah, I'll just go ahead and change this and do this for you." But something happens, like if they continue to ask you to do things, "Could you show me that again? Could you show me that again? Could you show me that again?" And after 50 questions, you begin to lose your patience. And maybe for you, maybe it's after 3 questions you begin to lose your patience. It's easy for us to get frustrated, especially with our family. Sometimes we're more patient with our friends than we are our own family. But I'm sure there are times where you want to tell your aunt or your uncle or your grandma, "Just look it up on YouTube." But then you're like, "Well, crap, I have to tell them what YouTube is, and I have to download that app for them." And it's just the whole endless cycle over and over again. Every day, though, we face opportunities to help each other in small ways. And whether it's showing your grandma how to use emojis, or helping a kid tie their shoe, or letting someone at your lunch table, at your house, I guess, with a virtual thing, eat some of your lunch or share that. Depending on who the person is, the need is, the mood you're in, how busy you are, you might help them or you might not help them. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And everyone is helpful and generous at some point, but there are times where we just rather wouldn't help. We don't want to be helpful. We're too busy. We're annoyed. We're tired. We're like, someone else will take care of it. And so every day we're surrounded, though, by people around us that might be in need and who need things from us. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch this 3-minute video And just imagine for a second, how would you approach this? What would you do? What would be your reaction? If you're like a minute in the video and you kind of get the concept, you can fast forward through the rest of it. But take a look at this video.
Ano? Eksi.
Акахлы скоро. Ты потерялась?
Mura tayo kontra.
Mura birot amisod. Tachuchkani romatsria. Let's go now. Lali. Tadi semua voda.
So I don't know about you, how you felt, but when I saw that little girl, I just pictured Haven. Like for me, that was like a real, man, I don't know what I would do if Haven got lost or if Haven was by herself somewhere, or if I saw a girl that was like, oh, that's someone's daughter. Like that's where my mind goes. Maybe you thought about a time where you failed to help someone. You saw someone in need and you failed to do that. Maybe you remembered a time where you needed help, but no one was there for you. And maybe for you, you've thought of both circumstances. Unfortunately, we don't always respond with compassion or care or concern when we see someone else in need. Sometimes we actually respond with the opposite. We're impatient, we're discomfort, or disgust or suspicion. The reality is we'll be the ones one day who are able to help, and sometimes we'll be the ones in need. Knowing that, wouldn't you want to live in a world where we all cared for each other when we're at our most vulnerable? And I know I would. I believe that's the kind of world that is possible and that Jesus is challenging us to go and create. So tonight, I want you to do something. I want you to turn to the book of Mark, and we're going to be in Mark chapter 10. And in the Gospels, which are the first four books of the New Testament, it tells the story of Jesus' life. And we find examples of Jesus meeting the needs of a lot of people, a lot of vulnerable people. In Jesus' day, there's often interruption from people's cries for help. They've heard about Jesus, they see him, and they yell and ask for help. And like one time, this blind man named Bartimaeus, he shouted at Jesus when he was walking down the road. And that's where we jump in on this passage. So pause this video, read Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. So does this story remind you maybe of a little bit like that video we saw earlier? Like Bartimaeus pleading for help, but everyone was like, hey, be quiet. The crowds, we couldn't be bothered. To them, he was just another beggar. He was not even worthy of help or attention. But Jesus, to him, Bartimaeus, he was worthy of his time. He was worthy of his attention. He was worthy of his help. Jesus took the time to pause and to minister to him and to help him in his time of need. And on another day, Jesus was busy again. He was actually on his way to save the life of this dying girl when he was interrupted again by someone who needed his help. So pause this video, turn to Luke chapter 8, and read verses 40 through 48. So because of her gender, because of her illness, this woman would have not been able to be seen as someone who was worthy of Jesus' time or attention. She most likely believed this about herself as well. And that's why she didn't even try to speak to Jesus, but simply reached out and touched the edge of his robe. After all, Jesus was an important man, and she wasn't. But to Jesus, she was worthy of his time, his attention, and his help. And he spoke to her. And listen, did you notice what he called her? He called her daughter. He called her daughter. And he met her needs with love. Now, this woman who's not worthy of anything, not even worthy to talk, was seen as an outcast. Like Jesus addresses her as daughter. And I think sometimes we see ourselves in that light. And I want you tonight to just believe Jesus addresses you as son and daughter, despite what you feel about yourself. And then here's the kicker. That person that needs help that you see on the side of the road, that person that needs help at your school, that person that needs help that you come across at a restaurant or something, Jesus sees them in the same way. And so for us, we have to begin to share and treat people the way Jesus did. And Jesus didn't show us how to just show us how to care for people. He actually talked about it as well. And shortly before his death, Jesus used this parable to explain something important about God and about his kingdom of God. And it's actually about two animals, sheep and goats. So before we read this, though, Jesus had a lot to say about sheep and goats. And there's something you need to know about these animals, right? Goats are pretty independent, right? And sometimes if you yell at them, they freeze up and tip over. It's pretty funny. Even when they're members of a herd, they go out and explore and head out alone. They tend to be more concerned about themselves than the other goat friends. Hey, goats, go skip around and do your own thing, right? Sheep, on the other hand, they like to be a part of a herd. They stick together. Except the one that leaves the 99. Anyway, they say, hey, sheep, let's huddle up. So keep that in mind as you read Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. So pause this video, read Matthew chapter 25, 31 through 46. So how does Jesus judge who are sheep and who are goats? He makes a decision according how they treat people, especially people who are in need, right? So goats, the unrighteous goats, were the ones who did not care for the people in need. Maybe because they were too busy thinking about themselves. Like in the video we watched earlier, this might have been the people who walked past the little girl to be removed from the restaurant rather than giving her something to eat. And sheep are the righteous sheep, and they were the ones who saw someone in need, and not just saw them, they ran to them and helped them. Maybe they saw themselves as part of the herd and were concerned that the other sheep were not close by. According to Jesus, sheep are the kind of people who keep their eyes open to the needs of the people around, and they ask this question, how can I help? How can I help? Right? Who knew farm animals could help us so much and teach us about caring for others, right? But through Jesus' example, through his teachings, he tells us and he shares with us that he constantly cared for people who had been canceled, forgotten, disrespected, ignored because of their needs. And now he challenges us to do the same. So we are to love people who are in need. Last week we said we are to love people who look different from us. We are also to love people who are in need. So how to meet needs? Like, how do we do that? How do we not do that? When we study actions and teachings of Jesus, here's a few things we can kind of pull out from him. It's not only about our actions, what we do, it's about our hearts, how we do it, right? You ever did something for your parents half-heartedly, and they're like, hey, you need to change your attitude when you're doing that, right? You've heard that before, right? Jesus doesn't challenge us to only act concerned about others. Like, he challenges us to actually be concerned in meeting people's needs. Like in this parable, sheep didn't know anyone had noticed what they did for others, but they did it anyway. Like, it wasn't about getting this fame and recognition. It was about genuine concern for other people. And that's what Jesus teaches us. It's not about loving, not only about loving others, it's about loving God. Jesus challenges us to love others well, yes, but he's letting us know a secret. When we love others by meeting their needs, we actually show love for Jesus. Every time we care for someone who's vulnerable, it's a gift of love and a gift to worship to God. Hey, God, I want to honor you by how I treat people and how I love people and how I help people that are in need. It's not about what we have, it's about what we can give. Some of you are like, man, I'm broke, I have nothing to give. It doesn't matter if you don't have $1 million. Give what you can. Help someone. Maybe you have extra clothes or shoes or things that you could give to people in need. It doesn't have to be money. We talked about meeting the needs of other people, and maybe you thought, like, I can't help anyone, et cetera, et cetera. But Jesus isn't just talking to wealthy people or important people. He was talking to ordinary people like you and me. Maybe some things you can give away is your time, helping someone with different things, maybe compassion. Maybe it is money, friendship, skills. Jesus says we can use it all for God's purposes and his kingdom when we give sacrificially, when we give passionately, and we give willingly. And last but not least, it's about them, it's not about us. It's about them, it's not about us. Sometimes when we talk about meeting needs of others people, we talk as if we're the people with all the power, all the resources, all the stuff to share, while the people in need are a separate group of people. It's like us and them. But when we think this way, it's easy to see someone less valuable than yourself. When we see people this way, it's easy to see them as lesser and, oh, I got to serve this group of people, or I got to do this for them, instead of seeing them in the way Jesus taught us. Like tonight, you remember the way Jesus spoke to this blind man was with compassion. The sick woman called her daughter. Like, there was respect, there was love. He made the crowds pay attention to these people that they once ignored. Jesus didn't give poor people charity. He gave them respect. He didn't just give them charity, he gave them respect. And guess what? We can do that too. When we remember that it's not about us, and it's actually about the people who need us, there is only us. We're about equally loved, equally seen, and equally valued by God. So how do we do this? How do we take care of people who are in need around us? Do we wait for this little girl to walk up to a restaurant? Do we need to ask God to help us heal blind people or sick people? How do we practically meet the needs of other people? We're going to talk about that in our small group, but there's so many opportunities around us with people in need. And if we're paying attention, we'll begin to notice that. And as we notice those things, ask God to give us the strength and wisdom in how to help those people in need. See, in Jesus' time, people in need were often canceled. They were often canceled by society instead of helped. They were ignored. They were judged. They were left out to fend for themselves. And guess what? We still sometimes have that problem today. But if you want to love like Jesus loves, and I hope you do, we are to love people who are in need. So when you do, it's actually like doing it for Jesus himself. So hey, I want to challenge you this week. Find someone in need, look around you, and help them. We need to love people who are in need. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week.